Today you're seeing a different side of my driveway. Normally I try and keep construction materials and whatever crazy thing is going on that side of the driveway out of the shot, but today it makes sense to include it because we're taking a look at a 2025 Ram 2500, specifically a Laramie with the new Cummins turbo diesel under the hood. Ram has made some pretty big changes for 2025, and there are actually some pretty big changes happening on that side of the hill as well, because we're adding on to the house. And of course, since we built the house ourselves to begin with, we're doing the construction of the addition ourselves as well. Over here we have sheathing, back there we have some lumber, and there's a whole lot more going on over the next probably 2 years or so because it's not going to be a rapid addition. Now, I normally would have hauled this material on my flatbed trailer, but this week, since we have the Ram 2500, we have done some hauling, and of course we're going to talk about towing later in this video, because that's the main reason to upgrade from a half-ton truck into something like a 2500. If you're towing 10,000 pounds regularly, and I mean every day, or if you're occasionally towing 15 to 20,000 pounds, you want to look at a truck like this. Yes, you could tow 10,000 pounds with the Ram 1500, but if you're doing it every day, you're probably going to want to look at something like this for the improved cooling, the improved braking, the improved stability, and of course, the Cummins diesel engine under the hood. Now, as I said last time, it's important to know that for 2025, the heavy-duty truck line has not seen a complete redesign as many of us had really hoped. It appears that's coming a little bit later down the road. So for the moment, the bulk of the truck stays the same, but they have upgraded the engine and transmission. It's actually a brand new transmission and effectively a brand new engine as well. Still 6.7 liters, of course, for the diesel. And then they grafted on all of the latest electronics and active safety systems from the Ram 1500 into the heavy-duty truck lineup. So adaptive cruise control, more camera views, the latest trailering systems, etc., all of that has been inserted into this truck. But we should talk about the engine and transmission first because that's where the big news is. Clearly, the big change for 2025 is the new diesel engine and the new transmission behind it, but before we get to that, let's talk about what happened under this hood last year. Things started out with a 6.4-liter Hemi and an 8-speed automatic transmission. That carries over for 2025 essentially unchanged. So if you want the most payload capacity in the 2500 or 3500, you want to get the gasoline engine. It's going to be a pretty decent difference in payload capacity, one engine versus the other, because the diesel is notably heavier. Last year, there were two different diesels. There was a high output and a low output Cummins. The low output was found in the 2500 and the 3500. The high output was only in the 3500. The Ram 2500 got 370 horsepower, 850 pound-feet of torque. The high output bumped that up to 420 horsepower, 1,075 pound-feet of torque. And the big difference between those two was you got an Aisin 6-speed automatic transmission behind the engine that could handle 1,075 pound-feet of torque. The low output version got the 68 RFE transmission that was built by Chrysler, now Stellantis. The big news for 2025 is that we have 430 horsepower, 1,075 pound-feet of torque in every 2500 and 3500. But below that top line headline is the fact that this is actually a brand new Cummins diesel engine. It has new blocks, new heads, a new fuel pump, new turbo, etc. They've even moved the oil filter around and changed actually a significant number of the systems on the engine, including the fact that we don't have the controversial grid heater anymore. We now have glow plugs. As with any engineering solution, there are pros and cons to either of these systems, but here's a general description of what's happening. In the previous Cummins diesel engines, there was literally a grid heater in the air intake. It heated air across that as it was sucked into the engine, and that's how you heated the air coming in, so that way you could start the engine in colder weather. We now have glow plugs that basically heat a small pocket inside the cylinder itself. That's what actually helps you start in cold weather now. This is the same technology that we find in the competition. Most everybody has moved on from grid heaters outside of big, heavy-duty diesel engines in much bigger vehicles than pickup trucks like this. We have the new fuel pump. That was also a controversial item in the previous generation of the Cummins diesel engine. They've upgraded to a brand new fuel pump here, and then we have a new turbo for a slightly better power profile and, of course, a little bit more horsepower. But the big news is the transmission behind the engine, because this now uses a brand new ZF 8-speed automatic, originally designed for buses and really big heavy-duty vehicles, much bigger than heavy-duty trucks. We're talking the next size category up. Transmissions designed to channel over 1,000 pound-feet of torque don't come along very often. In fact, they're really quite rare, outside of buses, RVs, and big rigs, of course. But interestingly, that's the origin story for this automatic transmission. Ram may call it by a different name, but it is essentially the ZF Powerline transmission, originally designed for buses and huge RVs and trucks much bigger even than a Ram 5500. Outside of this, if we're talking about transmissions that can handle this much twist, the only other option is the Ford and General Motors 10-speed automatic. Now, why Ford and GM? Aren't they different? Well, yes and no. You see, to digress for a little bit, Ford and General Motors co-developed a light-duty 10-speed automatic rear-wheel drive transmission for vehicles like the Mustang, F-150, the Silverado 1500, Sierra 1500, etc. It's used in a wide variety of GM and Ford rear-wheel drive vehicles. From that same core set of components and designs, each company beefed it up to create a heavy-duty transmission that in the Silverado lineup will go to 975 pound-feet of torque, and in the Ford lineup up to 1,200 pound-feet of torque. But the core elements of the design are very, very similar. Not identical, but very similar. Now let's take a look at the ratios and why the 8 speeds are so important, and why it's such an improvement over last year's transmissions. A good transmission can absolutely make a vehicle, and a bad transmission can yield a poor driving experience. And that's especially important for a diesel engine like this that doesn't rev very high. The red line on this engine is 3,200 RPM. It makes its peak torque at 1,800 RPM, so that's basically the range that we're working with. And that's why it's important to have ratios that are close together. In addition to the new transmission, Ram also decided to consolidate axle ratios. Last year, you had the choice of two, 373 or 410. You got the 410 with the Aisin 6-speed and the high output version of the engine. You got the 373 with the 68 RFE transmission. That actually is kind of an old design. Now, every model has a 342 axle, and that's interestingly the same ratio that we find in GM's trucks. Now, if you take a look at the chart on your screen, here's what's going on. The ratios that you see are the standard axle ratio times the gear ratio in the transmission for each of the gears indicated. In the Ford lineup, you do have alternate axle ratios. In the GM and the Ram lineup, you have just the one with the diesel engine. The most important thing on this chart, especially for towing heavy loads, is the effective starting ratio, and that would be first gear times the final drive ratio. In this truck, 16.11 to 1. That is significantly better than last year's Ram 2500 at 12 to 1. And remember that you got less power and less torque out of last year's Ram 2500. But even this 2500 versus the 3500 last year with the Aisin, this still has more mechanical advantage in first gear. And we have a slightly different torque curve, which they say is better. The last thing to know, and this really did surprise me, was that Ram threw themselves under the bus, and they admitted that there must have been at least some torque limitation in at least one of the gears in both of those transmissions last year, because they made a point to say that this ZF transmission can handle full engine torque in every single gear. And that is an improvement over some gears with last year's transmission setup. The next thing you'll notice is the jump from first to second. Very important for a diesel engine, definitely very important for hill climbing. In this, you go from 16.1 to 10.74 to 1. That's a much better jump than the 68 RFE, which went from 12 to 6.86. Below the all-important 1-to-1 ratio, this transmission has 5 ratios below that. So 6 is 1-to-1, 5 ratios below 1-to-1, versus 3 ratios for both the Aisin and the 68 RFE. And these ratios are a little bit better spread together, a little bit closer together than the weird jumps that we found in the 68 RFE's shift schedule. Now, how does it compare to the Ford and GM transmissions? Well, think of it like that 10-speed that's in the Ford or the GM, only missing 5th gear. So there's no 5-to-1 ratio, although 4th and 5th gear in this transmission are relatively close. Also, the bigger difference for highway fuel efficiency is that there's no ratio that's similar to 10th gear with this transmission. So in the Ford, you can do 2.09 to 1. In the GM, 2.15 to 1. In this one, you get 2.29 to 1. Not too far off, but if you really are concerned about high-speed driving efficiency, say on the open highway in Texas when you're unladen, then those 10-speed options may be just a little bit more efficient. If your eyes glazed over and that was too much detail for you, let me break it down more simply. Every heavy-duty Ram is going to be better to drive out on the road than before, whether we're talking about towing, hauling, 0 to 60 performance, etc. In fact, the Ram 2500 is significantly quicker than last year's model, about 2 seconds faster 0 to 60. That's thanks not just to having more power under the hood, but again, the automatic transmission and its ratios. And you'll really notice the difference in the 3500 high output to high output. It's nearly a second faster 0 to 60. But towing does not actually improve. Towing feel and towing performance improves. Max towing capacity does not. Things will top out in the Ram 3500, we're not talking about the chassis cabs here, of course, at 36,610 pounds. That's ever so slightly below last year. Max payload, still 7,590 pounds. That is, of course, with the gasoline engine, not the diesel. Now, if we're talking about the 2500, which is going to be the more popular model, with the diesel, this will top out at 20,000 pounds of towing, 2,740 pounds of payload. Remember, the engine is pretty heavy, and that's why the gasoline 2500 tops out significantly higher, 4,400 some odd pounds of payload. It's a pretty big difference. Towing is going to drop down 17,750 pounds when properly equipped in the gas model. If you're talking about the 2500, you do have to decide, do you want 2 tons of payload, or are you fine on average with about a ton of payload? It's a pretty decent difference. If you're interested in a chassis cab, those have also been updated for 2025, the 3500, 4500, and 5500, but you should know that we don't get as much power out of that diesel engine. Power drops to 360 horsepower, torque down to 800 pound-feet of torque, but it does get the same transmission, and you can get more aggressive axle ratios in those models. You can do 410 or 444. So if you want a really aggressive rear axle ratio for towing some of those heavier loads up really steep grades, you might want to go for the chassis cab 3500 because you can get that more aggressive rear end. Maximum capacities are all well and good, but bearing in mind that that would require a specific trim and basically no options selected, what the average truck can do, I think, is more important. When it comes to towing, the 2500 diesel is pretty consistent. Most models will tow around 19,000 pounds. The gas models, you see more variation there, 14 to 17,000 pounds depending on the options you select. If you choose the Power Wagon, though, things will get even lower. Having that big Power Wagon logo on the back means it comes with a different suspension system, and that dramatically lowers your payload. It can be down around 1,000 pounds and actually lower than some Ram 1500 Rebel models, and it will top out at just over 1,500 pounds. Definitely different than this truck, which has a 2,100 pound payload, as we're looking at right here. Max payload is, of course, going to be in the gasoline model at around 3,200 pounds on average, plus or minus 200 pounds for most of the trims there. The diesel, this is right in the sweet spot, 2,100 pounds on average, but a little bit more variation, plus and minus about 300 pounds, depending on the options you choose. Now remember, options are important because they all come out of the payload, as does everything you put in the vehicle after it rolls off the assembly line. So remember, driver, passengers, cargo in the bed, and even hitch weight are all payload. So for instance, on this model at 2,100 pounds of payload, if you took this one and then you added the sunroof, you added the passenger screen, you added, I don't know, whatever other luxury doodads, power running boards, blah, blah, blah that you wanted to add onto the truck, your payload out the factory is going to drop down. Then, if you take this to your favorite tuning shop and you add beefier skid plates, you add a lumber rack, whatever, brush guards, big bumpers, etc., then you're going to lower your effective payload even further, but it's not going to be reflected on the door sticker. And definitely remember that tongue weight, because if you plan on putting 10% of your 19,000 pound trailer on the hitch of this vehicle, you're going to have to be relatively light and driving solo in order to technically comply with those payload figures. Now, over here we have some camera inputs and a 7-pin wiring harness because we do get a bunch of cool new towing tech inside. A number of you were asking about my comments regarding front seat comfort. Well, not to beat a dead horse, but I do find these seats to be less comfortable than competitive seats, especially if you spend hours and hours in your truck. So if you're doing long distance state-to-state hauls, or you have a fifth wheel on the back and you're going all the way across the country, you might want to check out the F350 or 250 with the anti-fatigue front seats, because we do have a consistent seat design across that Ford lineup. Not so in the Ram lineup. These are not the same seats we find in the 1500. Most notably, we have only a two-way lumbar support, and it does hit me a little bit low in the back. Obviously, this is going to depend on your general height as to whether or not you find these seats comfortable or not. We have a tilt-only steering column, so it doesn't telescope for different heights, but we do have power adjustable pedals. Jumping into the back, we definitely have lots of room back here. You can see I have maybe about 9 or 10 inches of legroom with that front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. But we do have some old school touches back here. For instance, we have a pretty big hump right here in the back of this cab, and that's something that's not needed with the drivetrain that we now find under this body. I think that just has to do with the general age of the frame and the body combination in this truck. We also don't have the more modern cargo features that we find in some of the trucks out there, but we do have this flip and fold cargo floor thing. So we can unstrap it and then put cargo in that covered well there, or we can fold these feet out and get a flat floor for putting whatever you want to put back here. But importantly, we do have that bump up in the back of the cab there, which is why we have that little system. And then we have a 60/40 folding seat. So this is actually going to flip up one piece, center seat all the way to that side. Cup holders, 2 in the floor, 2 there, and then we also find 2 more back here. So if you love being hydrated on those longer journeys, don't worry, the 2 people in the back can share 6 cup holders. The model we're looking at today is a Laramie trim, so not a fully loaded model. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof above the driver and front passenger seats. The controls are over here. We also get controls for the rear window and the telematics system right there. You can see the size of that moonroof opening and how it impacts effective rear seat headroom. We do have that dish out there for the rear passengers' heads, but we do have a pretty substantial lowering of the ceiling line in this area. We have 4-way ratchet style head restraints in this model, leather upholstery, height adjustable shoulder belts, that Laramie badging there, and a bunch of different materials going on. So we get leather, we get the imitation suede insert, we get some piping, contrasting stitching, and a generally attractive theme. These seats are both heated and ventilated in this model. The seat perforations are smaller and more discreet than many ventilated seat designs, but it doesn't seem to affect seat ventilation performance. Now again, these seats are generally the same design as the pre-refresh Ram 2500, as are the front door panels. So if these seem a little bit square to you, a little bit different than the Ram 1500, well, you're not crazy, they are different than the Ram 1500. But very much like the current 1500 is the dashboard design. On this model, since we're driving the Laramie trim, we don't have the passenger screen here. One thing that I dislike is that the upper level trims seem to all come with that passenger screen. And if you want the fully loaded models, of course, you can't escape it. And I would love the option to just delete it and get the glove compartment back. We have a injection molded upper section of the dash that's been after stitched, harder plastics around that air vent there, actually surrounding the upper section of the dashboard, kind of like a horseshoe. And then we have harder plastics in the mid section of this dashboard, decently sized bin compartment, but you could not fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. A lot of pickup trucks have glove boxes that are a little smaller than you might think, which really makes me sad about the loss of this bin here if you get that passenger screen, and honestly, the passenger screen just isn't worth it. I don't know what I would ever use it for. We have the Harman Kardon audio system in this model. It does seem a little bass heavy to me, but it can be adjusted. We have a storage cubby here with a power outlet, kind of a nice touch if you plan on using radar detectors, etc. Same trim that's on the doors there. You can get real wood trim in the right models, but this is not real wood in here. This does have the bigger touchscreen infotainment system. There are 3 different infotainment screen sizes. The easy way to tell the difference between the systems is that we have a narrower physical button bank below and more touch buttons down there on the bottom of the screen. So with this setup, the trailer brake controller gain is on the screen. The brake control there for emergencies, that's down below. If you were to get the slightly smaller screen, then all of the trailer brake settings would be down there with physical buttons. I think that the mid-size screen is probably a good place to stop, but we do have a huge implementation of Apple CarPlay right here in the dashboard. It's running basically the same software that we find in a lot of Stellantis vehicles, whether that be Ram trucks or other vehicles in the lineup, and it operates very similarly with the vehicle option there, taking us over to things like camera, the dashboard, controls, settings, etc. The camera options, those are definitely something worth talking about. Now, we don't have the complete lineup of camera options in this vehicle because we don't have the digital rear camera, or rear view mirror there, and that would be handy if you had cameras on your trailer. So, for instance, let's go through these. We have curb views, driver and passenger. Of course, their organization in this camera software is not the most intuitive, but we do have a lot of them. Rear cross traffic there, cargo cameras, rear view cameras, surround cameras. The auxiliary cameras are what are interesting. You can have cameras in the trailer, out of the trailer, wherever you want to put it. But unlike General Motors' invisible trailer function, where the trailer screen is up here, or the camera readout for the trailer is here, Ram will put it up here if you get the digital rear view mirror, And I think that makes it an awful lot easier to use because you can still navigate and have that digital camera view. And it will splice other camera views together from around the surround camera setup to make more of a complete layout. Now on the downside, these camera displays, the readouts, actually do seem a little on the small side. I would like it if it used more of this screen. One really handy camera view is this trailer reverse guidance camera view where it's splitting rear-facing camera views from left and right. And you can move around a little bit and see how things are lining up there. You can put it in the auto mode where as you're backing up and you're turning the steering wheel, etc., it's going to change those camera views as you move along. Now, continuing down from there, we have the button for the engine exhaust brake, front and rear parking sensors. I like that you could disable them separately. 4 USB inputs for the infotainment system and an auxiliary input. You have the choice of wired or wireless smartphone integration, but we have 2 Qi wireless charging mats because, again, lots have been borrowed from the Ram 1500. We have this cup holder arrangement that slides forward and backward, allowing you to have access to that big storage area there, and it's common with the storage area that's under the center armrest. You can divide the areas by flipping that up, which is a handy touch, and it is a 2-level center console. So we have a small storage bin there, and then Ram logo on top of everything there. There's a look back there at those cup holders at the rear. Over here, we no longer have a rotary shifter in any model. They've actually moved to the column-mounted shifter, which I do find more convenient. It's an electronic column-mount shifter, so it doesn't feel quite traditional, but I think it's actually really handy there. Obviously, no 4 auto mode. We just don't find that in heavy-duty trucks. The engine start-stop button, that's right over there. On this side, we have a full LCD instrument cluster, again borrowed out of the Ram 1500, so it has the new software design, familiar with other Jeep models, things like that, where we have this sort of tableau view, and then we have all the traditional gauges, extra readouts, trailer readouts, off-road readouts, all that sort of thing there. Moving out from there, we find basically the same steering wheel as before with gear limit buttons rather than paddle shifters. I would love to see Ram actually move to a steering wheel design that had paddles because I find that a bit easier to control gears going downhill than this little toggly widget right here. Now, logically, that's just a personal preference because there's no functional difference. On the back of the steering wheel, we still find volume up, down, and track forward, backward, easily identifiable by that little bump in the middle. To the left of the steering wheel, we find the controls for what I think are the best towing mirrors in this segment. They are power folding and they offer LED lights, both forward and rear-facing LEDs. There's the rear-facing LED right over there. We get a wide-angle view mirror and then a regular mirror on top. And what I really appreciate is that in addition to these being power telescoping mirrors, you can actually adjust those different mirror portions independently. So not only is this upper mirror section powered, the lower mirror section is also powered. A little bit less obvious, but definitely very handy for adjustment. Now, my flatbed trailer and that Ram 2500 are both rated to tow this tractor on the trailer. However, my license does not allow that in California. You see, most Americans, about 75% of America, lives in a state where things are pretty cut and dry. 10,000 pounds conventional, 15,000 pounds fifth wheel. If you go above that, you need a Class A license. Some states offer commercial and non-commercial forms of Class A's. California actually is one of the handy ones where there is a non-commercial Class A. Read into the restrictions and why that is important on your own, but bottom line, that's why I'm not going to be towing this. Instead, we're actually going to be towing that on the trailer that it's currently attached to. And one thing I really appreciate is as soon as you connect a trailer, the car is going to start going through a light sequence. So brake lights on, then we're going to have turn signals on, other turn signal backup lights. So one-handed, I can just come around and go, hey, lights are all working on the trailer. Trailer's also tilted, so should be good to go. Now it's simply a matter of strapping it down. We've got our trailer cameras on. The system has automatically detected that we have a trailer connected, and it has automatically adjusted the blind spot monitoring. The next thing we need to do, of course, is adjust trailer gain, because this trailer has never been on this truck before. It is currently set for light electric. We'll just see how we go here. Yet make sure the trailer brakes are working. There's definitely a lot of weight on that trailer, so no slipping or braking there, but it feels pretty decent out on this road surface. And speaking of road surface, Clearly, one big thing to keep in mind about heavy-duty trucks is that we don't have a 4-auto mode. At least I don't recall ever seeing one. Maybe there was one once upon a time, but if you're looking at a heavy-duty truck, you're talking regular 4-wheel drive. So 2-wheel drive on regular road surfaces, 4-wheel drive on loose road surfaces, but the transfer case has the connector locked. So you shouldn't be using 4-wheel drive out on a regular road. And on a road like this, you can end up tearing up the road a bit more. Through those potholes, you'll definitely notice the firmer suspension that we have in a 3/4 ton truck like this. But the reason I mention 4-auto mode is that this is the road that I drive on every single day. I take trailers on it, I test vehicles on it, etc. I use this to get to the office, to the airport, etc. And that is definitely tricky in a vehicle in the winter with just 2-wheel drive, because 4-wheel traction is really, really helpful. And 4-auto, extra helpful, because you don't have to press any buttons when you get from one road onto the other. Here, if you have a heavy trailer like this on the back, you probably would want to engage 4-wheel drive in some of the corners and uphill sections that we're going to encounter here, especially at the beginning of this road where, traction is definitely important. But at the same time, on road surfaces like this, you'll notice the big advantage to getting a 3/4 ton or 1-ton truck if you plan on putting this kind of weight on the back. Again, this combo is about 9,500 pounds or so. It's a relatively heavy 26-foot flatbed. A 6-foot flatbed would be really, really silly. And around this corner here, especially with this kind of weight on the back, an F-150 or a Silverado 1500 can really get pushed around by the trailer. Now, on the downside, we have a really large turning radius, and that means turning is tricky, especially if you have forgotten to turn off 2-wheel drive, or 4-wheel drive, even though I just said that. And that's one of those things that I like about 4-auto. For that corner, 4-wheel drive off, because you could really feel that binding. And if you keep doing that for an extended period of time, there is some gravel on the surface of that road because it's interfacing with the gravel road. But if you're on a really good road surface and you're doing that all the time, you're just putting extra stress in the drivetrain that doesn't need to be there. And you can also actually make the vehicle less stable. The whole combination of truck and trailer can be less stable if 4-wheel drive is on. So definitely don't do that on a regular road surface. Now, out on the road, you're definitely going to notice the extra confidence thanks to that really low first gear. It means the hill starts like this are effortless. You don't really have to dig deep into the throttle in order to be able to do that. And then the gear changes are all really smooth, actually surprisingly so. These gear changes seem more refined than the 10-speed auto that we find in the Ford and the GM trucks, and significantly better than the gear shifts that we found in the old 2 transmissions that the Ram 2500 used to have. In this segment, often people buy vehicles like this for added confidence, and that is certainly something that you feel here. Whether you're towing, whether you're hauling, regardless of the kind of weight we're talking about, this is going to feel more confident than a half-ton truck. And of course, we get that cool, sweet diesel engine sound. The other thing, though, is that if you live in a mountainous area like I do, you're just going to get a lot more torque without worrying about overheating, especially some of those smaller engines, especially the turbo engines, going uphill, and then you get significantly more engine braking going downhill. But let's talk about the numbers next, because in our 0 to 60 test, this was definitely impressive. This model went 0 to 60 in 6.7 seconds. That's actually 0.2 of a second faster than Ram said the new 2500 would go. I was actually a little surprised that Ram's sandbagging a 3/4 ton truck for some reason. Now, 3500 is going to be largely similar. Depending on the model we're talking about, curb weights move around a little bit, but honestly, 2500 and 3500 are very, very similar. So expect that same performance to rain down on the 3500 as well. Clearly, if you get the dually, then that's added weight, so it's going to lower your performance down a little bit, but you get the extra payload capacity as a result. Also, if you're thinking about the chassis cab, keep in mind again, we don't get as much power out of that diesel engine. No real explanation as to exactly why from Ram on that front. Chugging along up this hill, you can definitely feel the weight of the trailer behind me, but this engine and transmission do an excellent job of hiding it. It spends most of its time in 5th or 6th or even 7th gear at the moment, going about 40-45 miles an hour up the hill. Absolutely no problem keeping that engine right in the meat of its power band. And that's the big deal with this 8-speed automatic transmission. The goal with any transmission attached to a diesel engine in this segment, especially the Cummins, which doesn't redline terribly high, is to really try and keep the engine at the optimum place in its power and torque band, regardless of the speed that you're driving. That's going to give you not only the best acceleration, but also the best towing and hauling performance. And that's a problem for the previous generation Ram 2500. Because the previous Ram trucks didn't have gears spaced as closely together as these gears are, it would have to rev up a lot closer to its red line. And as a result, you end up losing power because the peak here for torque is 1800 RPM. When you go above that or below that, you're not getting as much torque. And torque is pulling power. That's what's moving this trailer along. So you see a big difference here. This does not have to exit its power band before it can shift. That improves passing performance and of course towing and hauling like I'm saying. Now that we've hit the midway point, time to check on those straps. I'll be right back. Few extra clicks just for added safety, and let's go back down the hill to see how this performs when that 9,500 pounds is trying its best to push the truck around. Ram says that one of the other big changes this year is improved fuel economy, and it definitely appears that we get that. We've been averaging 18 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, excluding towing, of course, but now that we've added the trailer to the back, we've dropped that average down to 16.5. That is definitely better than the outgoing Ram 2500, and you'll notice a big difference out on the open highway, because we now have a higher final drive ratio that allows the engine to spin at much lower RPMs, use less fuel out on the open highway. You're gonna really see a big difference in those higher speed limit states like Texas, Montana, etc. You'll definitely notice a bigger difference up there at 75, 80 miles an hour. According to Ram, this engine is not only more efficient than last year's diesel, it's also quieter. And that definitely seems to be borne out in our numbers. I measured 70.5 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, and you definitely hear less of the diesel clatter in the cabin. Although, to be honest, I've always kind of liked the way that Cummins engines sound, so depending on whether you like that engine sound or not, that could be good or it could be bad. One thing's for sure, we definitely get the increased exhaust note from the engine brake, which is a really handy feature. And this exhaust brake does a really good job keeping trailers like this under control. If you live in an area with steep hills or if you frequently go up mountain passes, etc., you definitely want to check out this engine over the gasoline engine. You're going to get a lot more engine braking potential, and that's really going to save your brakes for later. A number of viewers had asked on the previous video, do you miss the extra gears that you find in the Ford and GM transmissions? Well, as I said before, between 1:1 and the starting ratio, there's only one gear missing. I don't really miss that too much. I would assume that there could be situations maybe where fifth gear in that transmission is absolutely perfect and we don't have a corollary in this transmission, but I haven't noticed it. What I think more shoppers are going to notice, though, is that higher final drive ratio in those vehicles. The 10th gear has no equivalent ratio in this transmission, and that could mean greater efficiency at higher speeds. However, we haven't been able to do a head-to-head test with this and the Ford turbo diesel engine. If this engine is more efficient than that turbo diesel, just inherently as far as the engine goes, then maybe we could have greater efficiency than that 8-cylinder engine. I suspect they're probably going to be quite similar. At the moment, pricing is uncertain on the Ram heavy-duty lineup, and that's because this is assembled in Mexico. And as a result, today, the day we are recording this video, if it was built today and shipped to the US, it would incur a pretty healthy import tariff. Will it have a tariff 30 minutes from now, tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? We just don't know. Will the tariffs go up? Will they go down? Will it be exempted, partially exempted? The future is very uncertain. Maybe God knows, but he may not even have a clue at the moment. The bottom line, though, is that at the moment, this is a good deal compared to the Ford and the GM trucks comparably equipped. You will generally get a better deal on the Ram dealer lot. But in the future, how does that price tag line up? We just don't know at this point in time. On the capability side, I think that Ram has done exactly what they needed to do with the engine and transmission. They're a fantastic pairing. The Cummins turbo diesel, fantastic engine braking, lots and lots of pull. I love the fact that we get all this torque standard now in the 2500, and that really adds to the confidence feel, towing, hauling, just daily driving, etc. The old Ram 2500, yeah, the gear ratios were a little bit funky, a little bit peculiar. It didn't have the get up and go that you would find in the GMC or in the F250. That is absolutely not the case anymore for the Ram 2500. This is finally a world-class engine and transmission pairing. The rest of the truck, though, yeah, it still feels a little bit old. I will say I got a lot of feedback, a lot of people complaining about the way that I described the driver and front passenger seat in the truck that we were driving out in Nevada. I will say that for me, it still applies to this truck. I don't find the driver's seat to be terribly comfortable or terribly supportive, especially on longer journeys. And I have spent many, many hours in this generation Ram 2500. I drove one all across Texas, all 900 miles of it, and then back the other way in a week. I have spent many, many, many hours and days and weeks in Ram 2500s in the past. I actually have family members that own several of these. The seats are one bummer for me, and I think it could be easily fixed. All they have to do is grab the seats from the Ram 1500, jam them in there, because they already grafted some of the other Ram 1500 bits in. Why they didn't do the seats, I don't know. Probably has to do with crash standards and the way they actually attach to the frame and the body of the vehicle. But aside from that, I have very few complaints. Yes, I do wish the cab was a bit more modern, so we didn't have that big hump in the back. But you know, that's the least of the concerns. You can get the mega cab if you want to. You can get this cab with an 8-foot bed, which is perhaps the way I would get the truck, although I would really love to see a flatbed from the factory. That's something that we don't really find in the competition. Rather than a sided bed like this, I would love to see a Ram 2500 regular cab with the long wheelbase and a flatbed in the back from the factory with the factory warranty. If Ram had one of those today, I would absolutely buy it because it would be pretty darn handy. As handy as a vehicle with a 26-foot flatbed, I don't know, but it might be pretty close. As always, let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned because there are going to be more reviews of the competitive trucks coming up soon because they're not standing still. They're definitely making some updates year after year. See all of you later.